for a seriously deep dive. You sent in some really thought-provoking questions this time, asking us to, well, to dive into a pretty hardcore critique of prayer.
Yeah, this one really pushes some buttons.
It does. It really does. They're saying that prayer, well, at least the type of prayer they're focused on, isn't just ineffective, but that it's actually a tool for manipulation.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? And get this, they even compare people who advocate this kind of prayer to wolves in sheep's clothing.
Wow, strong words.
Strong words indeed. But before we get to that whole manipulation thing, let's start with the idea, their main point, that prayer is, well, ineffective. What's the source's argument there?
Okay, so the source, they suggest that praying a lot of times relies on an external force, like God, to just fix things for us instead of us taking responsibility and actually, making changes in our own lives.
Yeah, and they get this really interesting question in the text. It says, if God already has a plan, right, why are we even praying in the first place? Like, doesn't God already know what we need?
It really gets to the core of like how we even view prayer, and it makes me think about, have you ever heard of that psychological concept, learned helplessness?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So if we're like constantly praying for things, but we're not actually like taking action, does that actually make us feel more powerless? Like, could it reinforce that feeling?
That's a really good point. I never thought about it like that before. But, the source goes even further with this. They actually connect prayer, or this type of prayer, to something pretty unexpected. Narcissism.
Okay.
Yeah, I was surprised by that one too. What's the connection there?
So they're saying that both religion and narcissism, like at least in their more unhealthy forms, they kind of rely on this like single truth idea, like this is the only truth, and it completely dismisses any other perspectives.
It's interesting. They actually use this really bold phrase. I wrote it down. The great narcissistic achievement of religions.
Wow.
Yeah. And they also talk about how narcissists tend to like project their own flaws onto other people. How do you think that plays out in the context of prayer?
So like instead of looking at themselves, they kind of blame an outside force, like the devil.
Oh, so instead of like taking ownership or saying, okay, I need to address this issue, they're blaming like some outside force for their problem.
Right, exactly. It's like they're externalizing all of the responsibility.
Wow. That's a pretty heavy implication, huh?
It is. It really highlights, according to the source, how this type of prayer could feed into this like victim mentality.
To be fair, though, the source does say that not all prayer is the same, right? They actually make a distinction between the type of prayer they're critiquing and prayer that's more focused on, like, reflection and self-improvement.
Yeah, that's true.
So it seems like they're more advocating for creating conditions for personal growth instead of, just sitting around waiting for this, like, divine intervention.
Yeah, it's less about the act of prayer and more about, like, the mindset, right?
Yeah, whether it's actually pushing you to take action or just making you feel stuck.
Exactly.
It's a big difference. Makes me think about times when, I've prayed for something but didn't actually, actually take the steps to make it happen. Was that really trying to change, or was I just hoping for an easy way out?
That's a really good question.
It makes you think, right? Maybe sometimes we use prayer as a way to kind of avoid those uncomfortable truths about ourselves, or even just to delay, having to take responsibility for things. But before we go too deep into that, let's go back to this whole prayer as manipulation idea. How does the source even connect those dots?
Okay, so they use some really strong imagery. Like they compare prayer to cultivating fear that makes us more vulnerable to external entities like demons.
Okay, that's intense. But is it just, is it just the language, or is there more to it?
I think they're trying to get at how certain types of prayer create this sense of helplessness and reliance on those external forces, which, according to them, could hinder your own personal growth and maybe even make you more susceptible to manipulation.
So it's not just about, the person praying, but about how that dynamic can be used by others to kind of exert control over them.
Right. If you're constantly being told to just, pray for a solution rather than actually like being empowered to find the solution yourself, it makes you kind of dependent on the people who are saying they have that direct line to God, right?
That's a good point. So they're saying that this type of prayer creates a power imbalance.
Exactly. It's something to think about, Who benefits when people are encouraged to rely solely on prayer for solutions?
It's like we're starting to see the strings behind the curtain, The idea that prayer, in some cases, maybe isn't even about a genuine connection, but it's about, maintaining control.
Yeah, this is giving me a whole new perspective on things. Yeah. It's kind of like we're seeing behind the curtain, huh?
It is. It really is. It's definitely giving me a new way to think about things. But let's go back to this whole thing about prayer, maybe getting in the way of personal growth. The source had this really interesting contrast they brought up between prayer and meditation.
Oh yeah, they talk about that. How meditation is about encouraging you to look inside yourself, like self-reflection, and they say that prayer, at least the kind they're talking about here, it can lead to relying on forces outside of yourself.
Yeah, there's this line that really stood out to me. He says, if God already has like a perfect plan, why are we even praying?
Right.
What do we think we're even asking for?
It's like maybe this kind of prayer where we're like begging God to change his mind. Maybe it's just like a misunderstanding of God.
Yeah, or even like a little presumptuous on our part, right? Like we think we know better than God.
Exactly. And they also get into this idea of like appealing to God's mercy through prayer, especially when we're asking for forgiveness. They say this could actually be more about us wanting to feel okay, like getting that external validation rather than really changing on the inside.
So it's like instead of us really owning up to what we did and actually trying to make things right, we just want like a cosmic pardon.
Right. And they seem to be more into this idea of like really looking inward, trying to understand why we did the things we did, and then taking action to, actually fix things
So
ourselves.
so real change, like real transformation, it comes from inside us, not from, someone up there giving us a free pass.
That seems to be their point. Yeah, it's about recognizing our own like power in this process, our ability to grow and change. And they tied this back to that whole narcissism thing
Oh,
too.
wow, how so?
Well, remember how we were talking about how narcissists project their flaws onto other people?
Yeah, yeah.
They argue that this is like connected to blaming those outside forces rather than looking inside ourselves. It's avoiding responsibility.
So it's easier to say, oh, the devil made me do it, than to say, like, okay, I messed up and here's what I'm going to do to fix it.
Yeah, exactly. It's about owning up to our actions and our choices, even the ones that we're not proud of. And this is where they bring up a really interesting point about how people give advice on like how to deal with narcissists.
I'm listening. Yeah. What do they say?
Well, they're kind of critical of that advice, the advice about like defeating a narcissist, because it keeps the focus on the narcissist, right? Instead of on your own healing and growth.
So it's like you're still trapped in their web, even though you're trying to fight back.
Exactly. You're still letting them control you in a way. The source wants us to like shift our attention inward, understand our own patterns and behaviors. Like, what are we doing that might be keeping us in this situation?
So it's not about changing the other person, which, a lot of times you can't do anyway. It's about changing ourselves.
Yeah, like how are you responding to them? It's about empowering yourself to break free, to create a more fulfilling life.
That's a powerful message. It's like you're taking back your power, even in a situation where you might feel totally powerless.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that core idea of taking responsibility for yourself. That's where true freedom comes from, according to the source, recognizing your own ability to choose, to take action.
But they did say, remember, not everything is black and white. They do say there's more to it when it comes to prayer and religion. There are nuances.
Oh, right. They acknowledge that there are a lot of good parts about religion and spirituality, and they say those parts have been like twisted and distorted over time. They even say that some people use prayer to like connect with their inner strength and wisdom, which is kind of similar to that medication idea we were talking about.
So it's not about like throwing everything out, right? It's about figuring out like what is actually helpful for you. What's going to help you grow and become a better person.
Right. And I love this imagery they use. They're like, be the creator in your own life. Don't just, rant and wave against something outside of yourself.
Yeah. It's like stop complaining and start creating. Make things happen.
Yeah. It's a total call to action. And it really makes you think about how we're using prayer or anything, really. Are we looking for those outside solutions or are we going inside to find our own strength and guidance?
This has really given me a lot to think about. It's like they're saying prayer could be a tool, but any tool can be used for good or for bad. Right? It all comes down to our intention. What are we trying to achieve?
That's a great way to put it. It's not about saying that prayer is evil, but it's about being aware of how we're using it and what we want to get out of it.
So it's not just about whether you pray or not. It's about, like, what kind of prayer are you doing? What effect is it having on you?
Exactly. And that's a really important difference. It's about being intentional, making sure your spiritual practices are actually helping you in a positive way.
This is reminding me of something else the source mentioned about how some people use prayer to kind of avoid facing their own issues, Like it's a way to shift the blame instead of taking responsibility.
Yeah. And they connected that to narcissism, right? How they both kind of depend on pushing your flaws outside instead of acknowledging them.
Yeah. It's like instead of looking in the mirror and being like, okay, I got to work on this, you're pointing the finger at something else, someone else.
Right. And that can be a really powerful defense mechanism, but it stops us from growing, from becoming better versions of ourselves.
So how do we get out of that? How do we move from like blaming to owning our stuff?
That is a great question. And I think it starts with looking at yourself honestly. We need to be real with ourselves about what's motivating us, about our own behavior. Why are we praying? What are we hoping to get? And are we actually ready to do the work, the inner work to really change?
Sounds like some deep introspection there.
It is, but it's also like super empowering. When we start to understand our own patterns, our own triggers, we can start making different choices. We can respond instead of just reacting. We can take responsibility instead of just placing blame.
And that's where the real change happens, right? Not from some magic fix from above.
Exactly. It's about understanding that we have the power to create change in our own lives and even in the world.
This whole conversation has really made me think about how I pray, and how I deal with challenges. This whole responsibility thing is really hitting me.
And it makes me think about how, we get so caught up in trying to change other people or like the things happening around us, but we forget about the most important change, the one inside ourselves.
Yeah, it's like that saying, you can't change the wind, but you can adjust your sails.
Exactly. And I think that's like a perfect metaphor for life. You can't always control what happens, but you can control how you deal with it.
It's a good reminder that we all have choices, no matter what's going on around us.
Absolutely. It's a message I think we all need to hear sometimes.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. I can't believe we're only halfway through. Maybe we should take a break here, let all of this sink in before we jump into the rest.
Sounds good to me. It's definitely a lot to process, but it's good stuff. These are the kind of conversations that can really change how you see things.
Absolutely. All right, so we've really dug into this critique of prayer, haven't we? We've talked about how it can be, well, kind of problematic, especially when it makes you too dependent, how it can be used to control people, and even how it connects to that whole narcissism thing. Oof. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also like, it really makes you think, right?
For sure. But now I'm wondering, like, what does this all actually mean for us? What do we have to walk away with from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is, well, the idea that prayer, it can be kind of like a two-sided coin, On one side, it can give you comfort, a sense of peace, and like a connection to something bigger than yourself. But then on the flip side, it can be used to, avoid taking responsibility for your own life, or to manipulate other people, or even to just keep you stuck in that victim mindset.
So it's not about saying prayer is good or bad. It's about, like, recognizing that it can be used in different ways, right? Sometimes healthy, sometimes not.
Exactly. And the source, they're really pushing us to look at why we pray. What's our motivation? Are we trying to get someone else to fix things for us? Or are we looking for strength and guidance from within? Are we letting prayer be a crutch, or are we using it to help us grow?
It's like they're saying, don't just pray for a miracle to happen. Be the miracle.
Ah, I love that. It's about taking control of your life and realizing that you actually have the power to create change. Which brings us back to that personal responsibility thing that's been like a theme throughout this whole deep dive, hasn't it?
It has. The source seems to be saying that real freedom, real fulfillment, it comes from taking responsibility for your own choices, not from waiting for someone else to rescue you.
And that's a pretty powerful message, Whether you believe in prayer or not, it's about recognizing that we all have the ability to make positive change in our own lives and in the world.
It's like they're saying, stop whining and start doing. Take charge and make things happen.
Exactly. It's a call to action. Become the architect of your own destiny.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to just, like, pray our problems away, then what? How do we find strength and guidance when things get rough? What are some healthy alternatives to that kind of prayer the source is talking about?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is going to be different for everyone. Some people find peace in meditation or mindfulness or connecting with nature. Others might turn to therapy or writing in a journal or maybe something creative. And some people find strength in their relationships or their community. The key is to find what works for you, what helps you tap into your own inner strength, what helps you build resilience.
It's about finding the things that empower you, not the things that make you dependent.
Exactly. And don't forget, there's no one right answer for everyone. What helps one person might not help another. Figuring out what works for you, that's a personal journey.
And it never really ends, does it? We're always growing, always changing, always learning how to deal with life's curveballs.
Totally. And I think this deep dive, it's given us a lot to think about. As we continue on that journey, it's made us question some things, maybe spark some new ideas. Hopefully, it's inspired us all to be a little more conscious, a little more empowered in our own lives.
It definitely has for me. This whole conversation has made me really think about how I pray, and how I face challenges. That whole personal responsibility piece, it's really stuck with me.
Me too. That's what's so cool about these deep dives, isn't it? They make us think critically, they make us question things, and they open our minds to new perspectives.
And that's what it's all about, right? Learning, growing, and becoming more aware and more empowered in our lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into this fascinating critique of prayer. Would love to hear what you guys think. What really resonated with you? Did it bring up any questions for you? Share your thoughts and experiences with us on our website or on social media. Let's keep the conversation going.
And remember, figuring yourself out is an ongoing process. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep growing.